Now, everyone, I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Ryan Autry. I'm the president of By Night Studios. I have with me here today the core writer on The War of Ages, Johanna Peterson. He's an award-winning LARP designer. He was involved heavily in writing the V5 Anarch book, and we're very pleased to have him with us today. Alongside him, we also have Gaia, who is a contributing writer to the book, specifically focused on the virtual role playing section on there. She's a moderator on the Seattle by Night chat as well as the official World of Darkness community Discord, and has, I think, a lot to say about how you can position best practices to run an excellent virtual role playing community. And then finally, I have with us Chris Angel, who some of you will know from the last AMAs. Chris is our director of content and will be helping me field all the questions. Elise will be asking them. So Elise, what you'll do is you just kind of go through the list, say who will be answering, and then pass it over to them to let them reply. Okay?
Yep.
And let's go ahead and get started in interest of time.
Really quick, also on is Garrett from Reverie Studios.
Oh, yes.
So we partner, as many of you know, we partnered with Reverie to put on the Saturnalia event. So Garrett's here to help answer any questions that may come up concerning that.
All right, so are we ready to get started?
Yep, ready to go.
All right, let's get to it then. Not to waste any time, right away. First question, what is Nordic style LARP?
Yeah, so hello folks, my name is Johanna, and thank you Ryan also for the introduction. Nordic LARP is a style of LARP that emerged in the Nordic countries, like in Northern Europe in the last 20 years, and it's also kind of like my personal home style. And the Nordic LARP style design, like when you play it, it emphasizes collaboration, like players working together to create good experiences for each other, and in a very collaborative way, like big emotions, big scenes, a lot of big scenography and fancy sets. That's kind of like the hallmarks that make it recognizable. And in terms of game mechanics, Nordic LARP tends to be like super light, very light. So often I think that if we make a Nordic style LARP and we have like one page of game mechanics, somebody will look at that and say, but there's too many game mechanics. How can we even remember all of these? So in this sense, there's a lot of difference in emphasis between Mind's Eye Theater and Nordic LARP. However, historically, the changes are not always so absolute. Like my first LARP that I ever played was in the mid-90s, and it was a vampire LARP, a Mind's Eye Theater vampire LARP. And a lot of the people who make Nordic LARP games now also have a similar background. They have a background with vampire, and there's also a lot of vampire LARP played in the Nordic countries. So in this sense, the kind of the seed of vampire has been also with us in the Nordic since pretty much the beginning of Nordic LARP.
Awesome. Thank you, Johanna. All right, the next question is going to be for Chris. This one is, so what exactly is in the book? Since there are no rules or mechanics other than fluff pieces, I don't really get it.
So the book isn't just fluff pieces, I'll tell you that. The book is going to cover a host of different topics. It's going to talk about what is LARP and what is Nordic LARP to sort of explore those differences. It's going to talk about more into the V5 Vampire Society. It's going to explore why the Camarilla hate the Anarchs, why the Anarchs hate the Camarilla. It's going to focus a lot on it's going to focus in part, I should say, on what unlife is like for Neonates and Ancilla within the Anarchs and how their experiences differ, and the same thing for how their experiences are within the Camarilla, to sort of help LARP players get a better sense of how they can play these different classes or ages of characters. It's also going to deal with some small LARP design ideas and concepts, some large LARP design ideas and concepts. It's going to talk about how to run LARP Space in Elysium, how to play the different sect positions within the Camarilla and the Anarchs. It's going to have example domains, and it's going to talk also somewhat about Sabbat society and what the Sabbat do in LARPs. It has a lot of content. I think a lot more than people realize. It's going to talk about life as a ghoul in the Camarilla and life as a ghoul in the Anarchs. It's going to talk about the Ashira, which we know everybody is very interested in, as well as the Second Inquisition and their role in the LARP, and a whole lot more.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay, so the next question. I see War of Ages as a V5 LARP book. Will everything you do from now on be V5, or will you also continue your current LARP line? Ryan, you want to answer this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are kind of two parts to this question. The first is that you are correct that this is a V5 LARP book. The second kind of part to it is, will everything be V5 specifically? I think the answer to that is no, because there are other game lines in the World of Darkness, and besides just vampire, though, there's werewolf, hunter, wraith, mage, even. So we intend to continue to expand and offer new things in those areas as well. There's also kind of a secondary question within a question, which is, are you going to continue to support your current LARP line? And so for those who don't know, By Night Studios released a Vampire the Masquerade book as a core system back in 2013, also via Kickstarter, as it happens, and has been running through that main rule set since then. Now, earlier this year, in fact, we released what we call V2 of that book, which was a significant expansion of the rules and kind of a delivery upon what was promised to the community with respect to that system. However, it was the last book that we plan to release within that system. Whether we support it or not, I think is kind of a broader answer that's needed, in that we launched the system reference document a little earlier this year, enabling anyone to find that rule set and play it online for free. So I would say that, yes, we're going to support it, but we're not planning presently to release any more books for the 2013 line.
All right.
Hope that helps answer.
And there's one more for you, Ryan. A little tack on here. Will you do a V5 LARP book with chops in the future?
Oh, for sure. But I really don't think that this year is the time, given that, as I said, we released the V2 book. Some folks, in this chat today are probably getting it within, they either got it within the last few days, and they're going to get it in the next few days. It wouldn't be appropriate to release a completely new edition right alongside that. So, yeah, in the future for sure.
Okay. All right, Chris, I have one for you. What is the exact date of Saturnalia?
So, at the introduction, I did introduce Garrett from Reverie Studios. As you all know, we have partnered with Reverie Studios, which is a Nordic style, US-based LARP company who puts on excellent Nordic style LARP events. So we've been working with them to pin down the specific date. We don't have the exact date yet, but we're close. I say that because we have agreed on November of 2022. We are working with hotels and the vendors in order to secure the specific date, but what we're aiming for is the weekend of November 11th of 2022 through November 13th of 2022, which is Veterans Day weekend.
Yeah, that's correct.
So that was a long way of saying we think we have a date, but give us a few more days to kind of work that out.
Exactly.
Alrighty. We have one for Ryan. This one's about the Sabbat. The question is, no Sabbat in this book? Will they ever show up again?
Well, I think you heard from Chris a little earlier. The Sabbat are intended to be in this book. The thing about, at least in my opinion, the Nordic style is that it's very flexible. So, because there aren't, specific mechanics for Sabbat as player characters in tabletop right now, doesn't mean you couldn't run a LARP run and build kind of your universe around it. You wouldn't need anything more than a Nordic book to do that. So, yes.
Alrighty. So here's another one. What is BNS's next book? I heard it's Mage, but others say Werewolf the Apocalypse.
To that I answer, nice try. We're not going to announce that today, but I do appreciate the question. We're always working on future books, but we try to not announce them until we're kind of ready to put our best foot forward.
I know, Ryan, you love Mage, so you'd kill to do a Mage book.
Oh, you know I would.
Yeah. All right, next one. Can you talk more about the $10,000 stretch rewards? What is the yearbook? And is the art book just what I am getting in the War of Ages PDF anyway, or extra stuff, art from older books, etc.?
So to answer that question, I think it's the $100,000 stretch tier, the one that's upcoming, please.
Yes, sorry, the $100,000.
So the yearbook is a section of the SRD that's actually active now. We have a kind of a prototype version of it, and it's essentially a place where people around the world who are using the system reference document can see an example of your character presented there and use that character as an NPC in their games. So I think it's just kind of a really cool, neat benefit. The digital art book is intended to be the art of BNS, so that basically the art that we have produced throughout our history, all pending approval and making sure that it meets current guidelines, and with maybe an omission or two if we want to remove a particular piece in order for the overall aesthetic. But it is intended to be the By Night Studios art, not just the War of Ages art.
Alrighty then. Okay, I have another one. With the emphasis of today's gaming world being on sensitivity and inclusivity, and Paradox's tendency to pull a license from areas that do not follow this, I often worry about companies that I enjoy continuing to be able to provide content for me to enjoy. My question is about the Ancilla specifically. What measures have you taken to represent Muslim people in an accurate light as not to offend their cultural beliefs and represent them honorably within War of Ages? Chris?
Let me just interject real quick to say that though I know the question presupposes it, we don't presuppose how Paradox chooses to treat their licensees. We won't comment on that. So let's just moving from there.
No, I completely agree with you, Ryan. But I also want to stress that we at By Night Studios are certainly passionate about making a very inclusive environment, and we understand that certain topics, or a lot of topics actually, sensitivity is very important, and we understand that, we respect that, and we will do everything that we can to address those concerns in the products that we release and the products that we make going forward. So speaking specifically about the Ancilla, we have been in contact with a number of writers with appropriate credentials to consult on that portion of the book and to assist with that portion of the book's development. In addition, we've been engaging with businesses that specialize in content review with an eye toward sensitivity, inclusion, and an eye toward proper representation. So we have safeguards in place to try and make, again, the environment and the community and the material as inclusive and respectful as possible to the topics that we touch upon.
Perfect, Chris. Thank you for talking about that. We have another question after that. Can we have a list of chapters and short explanations, like for the first stretch goal? Ryan?
A little earlier when Chris was kind of speaking about what exactly is in the book, I believe that was kind of taken a little bit from what chapters are expected. If you're specifically asking about the first stretch goal, there's 2 chapters. It is listed on the Kickstarter itself, but let me kind of give a very brief overview. There are 2 chapters in it, and both are intended to cover kind of unique scenarios that occur actually relatively often. Well, one that we expect will occur relatively often in V5 LARP, and then the other is one that does occur very often in LARP. Those 2 chapters are named Crafting Conspiracies and Bedeviling Beckoning. That's a working title. We might change that one. But basically, the point of the first chapter, the Crafting the Conspiracies, is players love to make a secret conspiracy. Now, we want to put together some writing to explain how you can do that and still play in a collaborative way with the game. It's really as simple as that. And give some examples of conspiracies that could work in LARP. The second is the idea of, you have an elder that's attempting to avoid the beckoning, which we know can happen at times. And, what are the steps that they're going to take? What are they going to try and figure out to get around it? And how can you tell an arc around that? Either as, people who are, characters who are surrounding the elder, or the characters that are involved specifically as as the elder, and you're kind of telling the story of their leaving from their position. So that's what that's about. Johanna, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that sounds good.
All right. Well, don't worry, Johanna. We have another question for you. Is War of Ages based on the end of the line, quote unquote, and enlightenment in blood, quote unquote, LARPs? If it is based on these LARPs, are there more mechanics in place?
So War of Ages, like as a book, is not based on End of the Light or Enlightenment in Blood. However, I personally was a lead designer on both of those LARPs, and also a third Nordic style vampire LARP called Parliament of Shadows. And so obviously, a lot of the experience that I'm drawing from when I'm writing this stuff in the book comes from those LARPs and how to make them. But and so just some concretely, we found when we ran those LARPs that some mechanics were just good and some worked less well. And what it would be nice to have all the good stuff presented here also, so that other people can use it as well.
Awesome. Thank you. We have a secondary question to that. Which systems and mechanics got added, if any, to War of Ages?
Well, I do think that's a kind of a hard one for us to answer here, because I don't think that everyone, at least that is listening, is going to necessarily know what all the ones that are in the Into the Line and Enlightenment Blood are. But maybe instead kind of an example of one of the newer ideas of the concepts that you're thinking of, Johanna, would be good.
Yeah, like for example, one mechanic that we used in these LARPs, which was quite successful, especially at the kind of anarch style low power level, was the really mechanic. So the goal there is to create like discipline powers that you can use in during an ordinary LARP play in a very subtle way, in a kind of discreetly, so that if somebody looks at it from like across the room, they don't even realize that this is happening. And this is great when you want to play on the masquerade, so that people don't necessarily know like who's a vampire and who's just an ordinary human. And the way the really mechanic works for a presence power, for example, is that you can just say, you really like me, and then the person who hears that understands from the really like that double word, they understand that a power is being used on me, and then they can play accordingly. But obviously, since all of those ideas in those specific LARPs were designed for a very specific experience, while here the goal is to provide tools for a wide range of vampire LARP experiences. So that's why also we want to go beyond the experience of those specific LARPs and just create a more broader guidelines.
Okay. All right, so we have a question for Ryan. The hunger system is a very important part of the 5th edition. Is there any hunger system described in War of Ages, and how does it look like?
So, from the perspective of, following alongside with what Johanna just said, this book is not going to tackle that question, at least not except in a very broad sense of this is how you can make mechanics for these sorts of games. Because each game that you would run in a Nordic style would be special, would be unique, and you'd want to really consider specifically what effect you're trying to achieve by implementing a system like that in those circumstances. There isn't one size fits all for this sort of play. It's very high effort, very high, production quality. It wouldn't make sense.
Okay, so we have another one here for Johanna. Are there example disciplines to choose from? We had a lot of problems in the past to design disciplines for Nordic LARPs. For example, we had to rewrite animalism completely to make it useful in a LARP. Have you redesigned some of the disciplines for Nordic LARP environment, and what do they look like?
I have a lot of sympathy for this question because I have also tried to make animalism work in Nordic LARP, and it is quite hard. So, I'm feeling the struggle here. But like Saturnalia, as it's coming up, is supposed to be in a Nordic LARP style, in a V5 setting, and what we're working on, and will work on as the event comes closer, is specifically like how to make disciplines useful and interesting, like specifically in this design style, because the goal there is that when you get your character and you look at your disciplines, what you will have is useful stuff that you can use in the LARP. Because in practice, what I have found often with Vampire LARP is that there's some stuff like Auspex, for example, that is extremely useful, and then there's other stuff that is less useful. And what we try to do here is to make sure that everything you have is something that makes sense in this LARP style, in this specific LARP, so that there's no kind of like junk that's only numbers on the character sheet.
Alrighty, so let's see here. Chris, what is the scope of the LARP, and is it a one-night event? What is included in the price of the event? What about food and drink? I assume this is in reference to Saturnalia.
I believe it is too. And since Garrett's with us, I'm gonna punt this one over to Garrett.
Sure. Yeah. So Saturnalia, the way we're doing the LARP tickets for this one is that it covers your entrance to the game, your character creation, pre-event socialization access, where we have like a forum for people to interact and engage with a lot of the content of the LARP. There'll be a lot of pre-game and post-game seminars that discuss the rules, the setting, and anything that's important for the game itself. And basically the game is expected to, well, we anticipate to be around like 6-ish hours. That could be, more or less. A lot of it is, going to be determined on the venues we have access to. And of course it's New Orleans, so it can go quite late. And we'll also have all the seminars and pre-game seminars, which will be taking place at the same time or around the same, time of the event itself. The LARP ticket won't include any travel to New Orleans, any lodging, food, or drink. But we do intend to partner with hotels in the area, to offer some discounted lodging rates, and maybe we'll include some refreshment options as part of some of the in-game event locations. A lot of these discussions are ongoing, and we have some great on-the-ground people that we're going to be working with that are like New Orleans natives that are, they're passionate about this project, and they really want to have us, have the thing that we all envision in our head about what New Orleans is going to look like when we all, become vampires in it.
All right, thanks.
The only thing I want to add really quick, if I can, Elise, is just to...
Chris, you can't. I'm kidding. Go ahead.
The thing I want to add to Garrett's great explanation is that I just want to make clear to our listeners that and people interested in attending the event, that when we say about 6 hours of game time, and we talk about seminars, that 6 hours is of game play. The seminars are separate from that. So it's not 6 hours we're going to squeeze in the seminars and squeeze in the gameplay. It's seminars and then at least 6 hours of gameplay.
Alrighty, thanks, Chris, and thank you, Garrett, as well, both you guys. We have another question. This one's for Ryan. Will it be possible to add Backers Bazaar rewards after the campaign is over?
Yep, we've partnered with Backer Kit to enable that through a pledge manager. So yes, absolutely. In fact, actually, one could argue that it's one of the real reasons to get excited about this campaign is because even if you just come in at the ghoul level, you'd have access to kind of an extreme discount on a lot of really good stuff for as long as it takes us to get the book out. Yeah.
Awesome. And Ryan, one more question about the Kickstarter. How do I increase my pledge so that I can get the physical stretch goal goodies?
Yeah, so this was a very interesting question we got a couple of times, and essentially it comes down to increase your pledge. Once you have selected your pledge, you go to manage my pledge, and then kind of somewhat counterintuitively, you select the same pledge that you already had, and then the second time you select it, the add-ons should appear. At least that's what we have encountered thus far.
All right, awesome. Let's see here. Our next one is going to be for Ryan again. What sort of surprises are in store in the new War of Ages book?
I'm not certain they would be surprises if we talked about them.
Okay. Big secrets.
I don't think it's so much of a surprise as something that people aren't talking enough about, and that's the section that we have Gaia helping us with, the spotlight on virtual roleplay. My opinion on virtual roleplay is that it's very fun. I personally like it a lot. I love text-based roleplay, but I think from the idea of War of Ages is providing a tool set to players of all kinds of games in order to enhance those games. This section especially provides an example of a standout group that achieve something that is just it's not even in the realm comparative to others. That they're very, very large, very successful, and it's because they made a lot of really good choices about how to kind of guide people through their information process. And I'm hopeful that Gaia will kind of have a chance to speak a little bit about that later with later questions.
All right.
Hopefully.
We will definitely get to it. Let's see here. Another one. This one's for Johanna. Will this book be useful to someone who has never LARPed before and wants to try it for the first time?
Yes. Yes, it will be useful. For me, it's almost like a matter of honor to make sure that it's accessible and useful to people who are interested in LARP and are interested in Vampire LARP and want to explore more of it. One of the advantages of the Nordic style that informs a lot of the stuff in the book is that because there's so much less mechanics and stuff like that to remember, the events are more accessible for people who find it difficult to memorize mechanics, obviously. And I think in a broader sense, like this is one of the great things about having a few different styles of Vampire LARP out there. Mindside Theater LARP, Nordic style LARP, other types of LARP, like online LARP, because it makes it each will reach a new category of people who find it accessible for them. And I hope that this book will serve all of them.
I hope so as well. I really think it's going to get to some people and, get them into LARP for the first time. That'll be very exciting.
Well, and what we want, like current, fans who are here from our current MET kind of games around there, is to think of this as a way that they could maybe run a recruitment game. Because it's so easy to pick up, you could give somebody the feel for Vampire LARP in a big way without asking them to read a book that's longer than Anna Karenina, just to get a seat at the table. They have a chance to come in, experience this, meet the people, start getting onboarded into the culture with this tool. And I think it's one that literally any group out there that's interested in role playing in the World of Darkness, and especially for live action role playing in the World of Darkness, will benefit from seeing some of these techniques that we intend to present.
Awesome. Thank you guys, both of you. We have another question here for Chris. Will we be getting a chapter teaser and what all is going to be in the book? I know we asked what's going to be in the book earlier, but are we going to get a chapter teaser, Chris?
So the answer is no. We're not going to be releasing the actual text of a chapter, partly because it's still in the creative process and the editing process, and we don't want to release something to the general public that then may change later. We want you to get the finalized product when it's released. So that's the real reason why we're not going to be releasing actual text of a chapter. However, since the questions started coming in for the AMA, we have started to discuss the idea of releasing either portions of the outline or the actual outline of the book. So stay tuned for us to make that decision.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Okay. This one's about a Saturnalia module. Will we be getting a Saturnalia module after the LARP finishes, in case we want to run something similar in our own areas? Ryan?
So because of the expense and the amount of effort that we intend to put into Saturnalia specifically, I think that we could certainly provide it as an inspirational piece, but I think it'd be hard to replicate it, in your area, so to speak, without the team and the resources that we're going to bring to bear for it. However, in kind of an anticipation of this, we're having some stretch goals that come up very soon, tied to instead of just the dollar amount, maybe the total number of backers, that will focus on what I like to call kind of a mini module for Nordic LARP that's more achievable for a single domain by itself to run and experience what it's like to play.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Let's go on to a question for Johanna here. What kind of discussions on common issues in Nordic LARPs and standard LARPs will be in War of Ages, such as managing bleed or effective conflict management via narrative?
I think the majority of the subject matter in the book is applicable to all kinds of LARP, like most of the stuff in the book. because there's so many things that we all share, from like things like physical production of a LARP. Like I know this is not very sexy, but it's stuff like venues or even stuff like bathrooms, things that we all need, whether it's Mindside Theater or Nordic LARP or whatever else. But of course, also I think it's interesting to discuss some of the more kind of complicated subjects as well. And since bleed was mentioned, I think that is definitely something that is in the book.
Okay, awesome. All right, so we have 2 here for Ryan. I'll start with number 1. Will you have anything in there to assist STs on trying to sell, for lack of better term, Nordic LARP and its advantages to LARPers who are used to heavy mechanics?
So I appreciate the question because it's a reasonable one, but I do think it comes from a kind of a place of maybe not grasping just how persuasive kind of the ideas and the techniques are. I think the only thing that you need to do to persuade most people that some of these are really good ideas is to show it to them and to really explain it to them one time. So I don't think you need anything else to tempt people in other than to say, hey, let's try doing it this way. And then everyone's going to look at it and look at that way and then be like, well, why weren't we doing it that way before? And the answer is probably because you didn't know about it yet.
Okay, question number 2. Can you talk about the paradigm shift necessary for players entering Nordic LARP?
Man, I would love to be able to say that there is no paradigm shift necessary, but that's just not quite true. There is, at least for some of the players in the current kind of style of MET, a bit of rethinking of kind of how to approach the act of playing in a LARP. And the biggest thing that I would say that kind of ties into this is, and you've seen some of this in our social media posting over the months before the War of Ages, and even included on the Kickstarter page. It's the idea of having a proactive commitment to a degree of citizenship with the LARP. The idea that I am here to have fun, but I am also here to make sure that my fellow players are having fun. Because if I am trying something that is fun for me, but really bad for the LARP as a whole, it probably shouldn't be done, because it would have been better if you hadn't done it for everyone else. I hope that makes sense.
All right. We have a question now for Johanna. Are scenarios discussed if, say, players get into a stalemate regarding consent? Example, player 1 wants to use Dominate to command someone to leave a scene, and the other player argues that they should stay in and doesn't consent.
Yeah, so specifically from the context of Nordic LARP, I think this question also shows some of the differences between these different styles of play, which I think goes back to the motivation of why we LARP. And in a Nordic LARP context, we very rarely try to play to win. Instead, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create cool scenes, or we try to play for story, have some kind of an interesting narrative arc, to play for drama. And that also means that when characters use discipline powers in a game, the motivation for using them is a little bit different. And usually, like that sort of a use of a power, what's happening there, it's almost like an invitation to the other player, like, how about this kind of a cool thing that you could now act out? And this sounds much less strict and much more kind of
Loose.
less well defined as a strict mechanical system. But in practice, in concrete examples, when I've been in LARPs and I've seen people use this consent-based systems for dominate or for presence, usually what happens is that the person who gets hit with that power plays it out like with like full emotional force. So if somebody gets stuck with dominate, then they will totally play it out. Somebody gets stuck with, I don't know, something like dread gaze, presence power, then they will like run out screaming from the door. And I think the reason that happens is that they think like, aha, it's fun to play this a little bit even over the top. it makes the scene more dramatic.
I
Well,
agree.
yeah, I was about to say, Elise, you're the type that loves to ham it up.
I'm a bit of a ham.
I was going to kind of add on to that from the MET perspective. I'm sure that anyone who's played MET has attempted to use like a path of corruption power on someone and gotten into like a feeling of like this isn't what I wanted. you know how you're reacting to this isn't fun because of the the nature of them not having agreed to it beforehand. It makes it difficult to really get the impact from a story perspective. And sometimes folks will I don't know what the right word for it is, but they will attempt to kind of navigate around the loopholes of how things are written and look for any excuse to spoil the whole scene. And you don't really find that in Nordic.
All right, so let's see here. We have one for Chris now. Were there any additions or subtractions from things like merits, flaws that didn't fit? And is there a different form of character creation in this book?
So I believe the last question, I believe this is a question related to the book, so I'm going to answer it based on the book substance. I don't know if Garrett wants to speak about the LARP character creation process after for Saturnalia, but speaking to the book directly, War of Ages, again, is a book that discusses Nordic LARP concepts with the goal of arming the players and storytellers with the tools needed in order to run a Nordic gamer scene and then apply those concepts to a V5 setting. But it is mainly a V5 LARP setting book. I know we talk a lot about Nordic and the Nordic aspect of it, but it really is a V5 setting book. And it's and as a V5 LARP setting book, it will explore the use of disciplines and powers in the V5 setting, but it doesn't exclude or add additional merits and flaws in this book. Regarding character creation, yes, Nordic LARP character creation is absolutely different than mechanical-based character creation from like a prior Met rules book. It's a completely different process, and the book itself will touch upon that process and explore it in order to give some ideas on how to go about creating a Nordic-style character.
Yeah, I would say for Saturnalia, we'll certainly employ Johanna's intimate knowledge with the War of Ages book to sort of color how we want to approach the character creation for Saturnalia specifically. But we're going to have a character creation system that we're building that largely is around building interlocking archetypes and roles and social groups so that you can very quickly build a character that is interesting for you, that fits into the larger Saturnalia event, gives you lots of opportunities to roleplay with other people and just a really cool character that you kind of like build from scratch. And the system is one of the things I'm really excited about for Saturnalia.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Garrett. Let's got one for Ryan here. Are there guidelines for who can play elders versus Ancilla or Neonates?
Well, I think that there's going to be sections that will describe, and Johanna may be the better one for this than myself, but the book is written from the V5 standpoint, so it's told mainly with explanations for playing a neonate or an Ancilla, as opposed to an elder, most of whom have been beckoned away. I do think there could be the kind of unique scenarios of the elder that's remained behind and seen their kind of world and their power structure go all topsy-turvy on them. But as for guidelines as to who can do it, I think that is a question that would be extremely tied to the nature of the specific LARP in question and ultimately determined by the folks producing that particular LARP.
All right.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's like the thing that makes it a little bit difficult is that I know that people like to play elders, but in a sense, Vampire provides a lot of its best experiences for when you play a neonate or a younger character, and this is especially true in the world of V5, which has been kind of like what happened between V5 and earlier editions of Vampire. It was redesigned in some parts to specifically make this better. So that's why I think it also makes sense to focus on that, to have the best possible LARP experiences for all players.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So we have another question here. This one's about more mechanics. How do consent mechanics work in combat? I'm thinking of some troops I've played with where the plot is monster versus, characters versus monster or the big bad evil guy of the week. How does that work out when players are fighting an NPC without feeling like it's an arbitrary part of the ST or making sure they don't feel like they're on rails?
So I'm going to field this within the context of the book and then, open it up if Johanna or Garrett or anybody wants to make any additional comments about or as it relates to this question. But the War of Ages book itself is going to set out various Nordic systems to handle combat and violence in a Nordic style game. And those range from, planning the scene to use of combat scores to structured acts and other tools that help explain the different combat and violence options that can be utilized to provide participants with the most immersive experience and the best options to create that experience while maintaining their agency over their own character. So, because again, it is sort of a consent negotiation style of play, different systems and mechanics for violence can apply depending on the type of game you're running. So the book is going to try and lay out those different options for the storytellers to use in designing the LARP that they're going to run.
Yeah, just to add to that, like, so a really core idea in Nordic LARP is that each LARP is like a bespoke design. So you think what's the experience you want, and then you use the elements that produce that effect. And I have found just through experience that violence and fighting and combat is like where this really is important to lay out. So we have these different options that are explained, and just as an example of something that's very different from other maybe more traditional combat systems, there's the structure act system, which has been used in many Nordic LARPs. And the way it works is that the LARP has, let's say, three acts, and in Act 1 and Act 2, maybe combat is like you can get harmed, but you cannot be killed. And the point of this is that nobody wants their character to die like 15 minutes into the LARP, because that's terrible. So instead we say that characters can only be killed in the last, let's say last act, so last hour of the LARP. Obviously this is very artificial, but we have found that players adjust to this very easily. Personally, I think because everybody understands that they don't want their character to die too early. So it can also mean that then things get very violent in the end, but that can also be quite interesting in terms of LARP dynamics.
Alrighty there.
Yeah.
So, do you guys have anything to add, Garrett?
Sure. I just wanted to speak to my own personal experience
Go ahead, jump
with
in.
combat mechanics, and when I experienced Nordic for the first time, and sort of seeing how the conflicts were resolved, I remember all of the combats. Whereas before, when I was playing in the MES, I don't really remember too many of them, but all of them were phenomenal. And I would say that the sort of conflicts that I've had are always memorable. They're always exciting. And also, it's really cool to watch other people fight too, because they've negotiated a lot of this stuff, and you're watching a bunch of people like actually act out what is happening. They're doing it safely and with all the consent. So I think it's a really cool mechanic.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So I have one here for Gaia. This one, I heard Nordic suits virtual games. Can you explain why and why it's covered in the book?
Yeah, absolutely. Good evening, everyone, first of all. And the question, virtual games, in my experience, especially the very large ones with a large player base that resemble LARPing more closely in their scope as opposed to small tables, often or even like a lot of the time have scenes where two or more players, like a group, want their characters to go through something specific, which can be emotional growth or something that should happen for dramatic reasons, or because they think writing it is very cool and they want to do it. And writing it is time intensive, and especially when you get attached to your characters, can be pretty emotionally draining. And sometimes these players may not have the option to be overseen by a storyteller when they are role-playing their scene, or maybe they don't want to put the dramatic climax and resolution of what they're doing in the hands of a dice roll in the hands of the randomness of the dice. So perhaps they want the dominate command to work. They want to resist a blood bond. They want to a punch to land. They want, for example, for someone to fail and the other person, they want them to succeed, and are both agreeing that this is the best and coolest thing for their scene, for their completion. Or perhaps they want ensure that something challenging or emotionally taxing is negotiated ahead of time to make sure that everyone is on the same level of consent. And this is where Nordic LARP lures and practices can help them, can come in play to enhance their virtual game, their scene, or really, honestly, any game possible, even like your regular small tables.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a wonderful explanation of it, I think. And I would just kind of jump on to say something that Johanna told me a while back about how Nordic LARP really determines these kind of things. And the answer is a lot of it's front loaded is the way that Johanna put it to me. And I think that's absolutely right. You know, by preparing the scene ahead of time, as opposed to leaving it its resolution determined by the dice in that circumstance, you're able to work out a kind of story that can be very emotionally intensive, and everyone feels comfortable doing it. And it really just comes down to that work ahead of time.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Okay, so I have a small question here. I know we covered it earlier, but just once more. Chris, will all future BS releases be Nordic?
The answer is no.
Okay.
Finance Studios cut its teeth on mechanics and mechanic conversion from tabletop to LARP, and we will certainly be returning to mechanics and mechanic-based books in the future. But that does not mean that we may not build in some Nordic components into those books as separate systems that can be adopted. It really depends on the project we're working on, but the answer is Finance Studios is not becoming a full Nordic book company.
Best of both worlds. I like it. All right, Ryan, let's go with this one. Nordic LARP is extremely rules light. Why would anyone even need this book?
So I think the answer to this comes from understanding that the question is only somewhat understanding what the book is right now. The book is not just about Nordic LARP. The book is, kind of in order, an expansion of the modern vampire setting, the V5 setting. It's an expansion of that is focused on supporting immersive and great LARPs. As Chris mentioned just a minute ago, MAT was created by converting the TTRPG. It was among the first to make that transformation and arguably the greatest to do so. And over the last 30 years, as the LARP settings evolved, community shifted, the hobby has had some difficulties, in different areas, and even the TTRPG did at times. And that connection that began with LARP and TTRPG so close together, really split. And so our view at Binance Studios is this book provides a way for them to come back together a little bit, brings them in line, their settings in line, so that there can be these new avenues for players to play in LARPs, and also for LARPs to become a recruitment engine for tabletop games, as things were in the best of times, so to speak. The second is that this book is a series of concrete canonical examples of things that you can do in a LARP setting for telling great stories. So having these examples provides inspiration in writing prompts and really allows people to tell better stories while they're out there. I could say even for myself, reading old tabletop setting books was where a lot of the ideas I got for some of my most, favorite characters and even the mechanical LARPs came from. And this book is like that, but focused specifically on those kind of stories that really, really sing in LARP, so to speak. Third is we've got this huge focus on virtual role playing. There's a lot of information there about how you can add a virtual component to your games. And the reason that you want to do this, especially if you're running a LARP right now, is that if you don't have a virtual component and you're running monthly, you have 1 day a month that a person within that month can find out about your game and get involved with it. If you have a virtual component that is always on, even if just in kind of a social environment, you have the opportunity to be just in time recruiting with when a player finds out about LARP and is kind of interested in checking it out. Well, they can check it out right now, as opposed to potentially waiting up to 29 more days before the next LARP to play. Hope that helps explain that. And then finally, of course, we have the again, with concrete examples of how it's been done in the real world, the index of not an index, but an appendix of Nordic LARP production methods that are going to be applicable to Mind's Eye Theater kind of games by one of the best Nordic LARP designers in the world. So I guess my answer to it's extremely rules light, we already know everything we need to know in this book just because it's rules light. I don't think it's a valid question necessarily.
Awesome. That's quite a lot of, I think, really great reasons, even to just take a look at it and take a look at the Kickstarter. We've got another one after this for Chris. My group and I do not LARP. So how much of this book is made for a tabletop role-playing game? I mean, you already mentioned that you will have some lore sheets, but apart from those, how much will be usable for those of us who do not LARP?
So I think Ryan touched upon a lot of the things that can be transitioned to different styles of play in his last answer that he gave. But I will respond by saying that the book is focused on V5 and the V5 LARP setting and experience. However, as mentioned in the question, it contains lore sheets and other LARP setting information. But I think what's important about that is any information from any World of Darkness book can be drawn upon to enhance other World of Darkness games. So while this book doesn't contain specific mechanics specific to tabletop, there's always concepts in games and nuggets of knowledge and nuggets of ideas that can be taken and adopted. I mean, I know that the questioner said they don't LARP, but if you talk to LARPers, you'll find a lot of LARPers draw a lot of stuff from tabletop books and incorporate them into their LARP games. And I think you can find that the same versatility exists in any book published in the World of Darkness setting. So much material is just universal that I think you'd be surprised at what nuggets you can find that you can adopt to different settings and different play styles.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. We have here right now, this one's for Gaia. Is it possible to integrate Nordic LARP style into online play?
Yes, absolutely. This is kind of what I already touched on in the other question. But as someone who's been a storyteller on Untitled by Night for 2.5 years, I think now, we have a great player base there, and we try to really foster an atmosphere of consent. And I personally witnessed a lot of situations where Nordic LARP methods were used in play by people who otherwise do not play LARP and do not even know Nordic LARP, but they still use the same rules, so to speak. For example, I've seen players who deliberately choose to lose a conflict against someone else so they could achieve something they would prefer narratively. Or, for example, two players who decide not to throw dice and simply decide for themselves, say that one character would be able to read the other character's mood without making an insight roll, because the other player left deliberate clues in their writing or fed them to the other player little hints, hey, this is happening, and your character will be able to tell that this is happening. And that would be an inside roll usually, but instead the players decided, yeah, you can tell that, you'll be able to, you can tell. So that is basically Nordic LARP style integrated in online games. And even when there's a storyteller led events that have a few, say, fixed points of action that are intended to kickstart something for large numbers of players. Those events can also be negotiated ahead of time with key players so that they are emotionally prepared for something that is hard-hitting, a hard theme or a scene. And these people are also able to step away and say, hey guys, I'm not comfortable, I'm stepping away from this scene. And that comes with no penalty. So that is all Nordic LARP in an online setting.
All right, then. Let's see here. We have one for Ryan here. There is a perception of Nordic-style LARPs as being primarily one-shot or limited-run events, contrasted with the perpetual chronicle style of most existing vampire LARPs. Trying War of Ages with Saturnalia emphasizes this connection. Will War of Ages address this distinction?
Yeah, so I think there's another way to look at this as well, and I think that the way that I like to put this is I tie it back to something I care a lot about, which is care a lot of that I find very enjoyable, which is anime. And when I say anime, I mean to give an example of this. Let's take Sailor Moon. When you're watching Sailor Moon, it's a weekly serial show that they're putting out constantly. They've got certain sequences. For example, the transformations is what kind of jumps out when somebody thinks of Sailor Moon. The transformation sequence, it's so clear that they've put an intense amount of effort into animating every frame of that transformation because they knew that they were going to reuse it. They were going to make it the standout moment. It's the piece that elevates the product as a whole. I view Nordic LARP as, in many ways, a very powerful tool for one-shots, yes. But I also think that the best way to integrate it with current games is kind of understood as, these are the moments where you want something to really stand out, where, even though you can't do this for every single moment in time of a weekly or a monthly running LARP, but for these moments, these very critical key moments in the story, you put the extra effort in and you make something really exceptional. So I guess that's kind of my answer to it. So in a way, it's just saying yes, but that kind of a sneak peek to it.
All right, so we have another one about the perception of Nordic-style LARPs. This one I think Johanna might be able to answer.
Okay.
There is a perception that Nordic-style LARPs are largely or completely free-form, strictly consent and negotiation-based, whereas existing vampire LARPs have strong mechanical backbone. What sort of advice will be present in War of Ages for bridging that gap? Is it all or nothing, or is it a set of dials that can be adjusted?
Yeah, it's definitely a set of dials that can be adjusted. Like that is the thing, because like just in terms of what we're trying to do with War of Ages, like the point is not to like export a model and saying like this is Nordic LARP, you will play this. That is not the goal. The goal is instead to look at the tools and create a sort of a tool set, a collection of mechanics and ideas and concepts, and then I think ideally what would happen is that people who run games like in Europe or in the US, like storytellers creating their own games, they will look at the toolbox and think like, aha, I know my players. I know this tool will work wonderfully with them. And then they can use their own judgment to use that, and then it will work. And I think this is really the best approach, because it's always the people on the ground who understand best like what kind of tools and methods and systems and all of that will work for them.
All right. Let's see here. Let's do one for Chris. Many players are primarily familiar with Vampire LARP through network organizations such as MES, One World by Night, and UT. Is there any advice for how much these networks can adopt these Nordic style techniques?
So this is okay. So yeah, so the answer is going to be yes. I think, I was a storyteller in the MES for a very long time, as most people know. And I think that there are certainly Nordic concepts that are going to be contained in this book that if the clubs wanted to adopt to utilize in their games, I think they find it very easy to do. I don't think there has to be sort of guidelines where we say, the golden circle or it can be used in this way, or the campfire rule can be used in this way, as far as this is how you integrate it into your LARP. I think the concepts are so pure and self-explanatory that if a storyteller wanted to adopt it into their game, and if a club wanted to adopt it into a club game, I think they could easily make that adjustment. So we're not going to have a section in the book that says, MES, OWAD, and UT, if you want to incorporate these rules, here's how to do it. But I think a good storyteller, which these clubs have many, many, many excellent storytellers, has the ability to read a set of rules and concepts and integrate them seamlessly into their games when they decide what will work best for their organization.
Okay, similar question. This one's for Ryan, though. Is War of Ages the new V5 LARP setting and all new rules, or is War of Ages a new setting and how to blend Nordic elements into B&S rules? And a second part of this question, is the long-term goal to switch to true Nordic, and is this a test of that? I think we answered part 2 a little bit earlier, but I want to talk about that part 1.
So just explaining it quite quickly, War of Ages is there is only one setting in the modern World of Darkness, which is the V5 setting. It's an expansion of that setting. It also introduces some content in the way that would be, somebody who's brand new to the setting would be able to become involved because of this content. But it is not, it's as I suggested in my earlier response, the idea is to harmonize and make it interoperable with the tabletop setting, not to divert, once again, branch off and make it more difficult for people to play. The whole goal, and I think if you care about the hobby, it's a goal that you should find a way to become in support of, because the whole goal is to make it as easy as possible for people to find out about LARP and for people to try LARP, and for there to be harmony between the TTRPG setting and LARP is the best kind of method for that to happen.
Okay, so we have our last 3 questions. So if you guys are in the chat and have a burning question, you could go ahead and put it in the AMA questions, and we'll hopefully be able to get to it as well. But right now, we have 3 left. This one is for Johanna. Nordic LARP can look like a lot of things. What specifically can you tell us about the Nordic rules mechanics in the book?
I have like one example of a mechanic that I particularly liked when I saw it in Swedish Vampire LARP where I was playing, and I think this is also a good example of like the kind of the approach that the Nordic style tries to take, like to make the mechanics very kind of natural, unobtrusive, so that there's no interruption to the kind of flow of play. And I was playing like a Bruja character, maybe like a Bruja tough guy. So tough but dumb. That was what I was playing. And the other character was a Malkavian, and the power was a Dementation power, or I think in V5 era Dominate power, that affects emotions. And the way it was implemented affects the intensity of emotions. And the way it was implemented in the LARP is that there's just one simple hand gesture, that you look somebody in the eye and make the hand gesture. And it's the same gesture you make when you are in a party and somebody is sitting by the stereo and you try to communicate to them to either turn up the volume or turn down the volume. So turn up the volume, look them in the eye, lift your hand, turn down the volume, look them in the eye, and lower your hand. And this is exactly the same gesture that was used for this like emotional mechanic. And because as a player I know the mechanics, and there's not too many of them, I know that this is how it works. And it was actually quite fun to play, because what the other player and the like the Malkavian were clearly just fooling around. And what she did was that she kept doing like up and down and up and down. And the way I respond to that as the other player is basically like I intensify my emotions, so I ham it up. and then I tone it down so I'm very cool, and then I hammer it up again, and I don't even remember what we were talking about, like what was the subject of it, but I thought the scene was really fun to play, just because of this use of this one specific mechanic. And I think there's a lot you can do with very specific discipline powers that work super well in a social game like a LARP.
All right. That's a very fun story. You have to tell it sometime in the chat here. We have here one for Chris. B&S Masquerade Volume 2 offered some cursory details and narrative about the state of vampiric society. It sort of offered a glimpse into how the B&S universe transitioned into the V5 universe. Will War of Ages offer more details on the V5 universe? Parentheses, for those players who haven't purchased it, parentheses. And how has it changed from the B&S setting? Also, will there be details about the Second Inquisition as antagonists?
Let me start with the back end of that question and work my way toward the front end. So first, yes, there is going to be information concerning the Second Inquisition as antagonists and their use in a LARP setting. And now go jump sort of to the front of the question. Yes, the book will contain information concerning the V5 setting. Again, it is a V5 setting LARP book with Nordic elements introduced throughout it. But as a V5 setting LARP book, it's going to talk about the Anarchs and the Camarilla and what their current feud is. It's going to talk about the Beckoning to some degree. It will certainly be mentioned in the book. It's going to talk about, concepts in Elysium and the different discipline powers that you encounter in V5 that are, because you'll see that they are different than V2. So the answer is yes, it is going to touch upon more of the V5 setting throughout the book, because again, it is a V5 LARP book.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And last question. So if you guys want to put your questions in AMA Questions channel, if you have any burning ones you still haven't asked yet, but this is the last one right now. For Ryan, can you tell us which lores will be covered in War of Ages? Will it only be the ones from the Kickstarter backers, or are you writing some too? Will these lore sheets be quote-unquote official for all of V5, including tabletop RPGs?
So I think our intention is to have it primarily be the ones that are found through the co-creation tiers, and so I can't tell you which ones they are because they haven't been decided yet. This is intended. The co-creation tier was intended to be exactly what it sounds like. Something that you really work with us on a kind of narrative level to scope out and add something powerful to the game. Is it intended to be applicable to all of V5? Yes. It is intended to be so, God willing, and by God I mean Paradox in this case. It will be. Yeah. Well, if we don't have any more questions, we have another question
coming in. Yes, they're coming in right here. Some last minute ones. We've got one right here. Here's one we might have missed. You never answered. You get to be one of the first people to actually explore the Ashahari. How was the writing for the different than the Camarilla? Chris.
This is a Johanna question, I think.
Johanna.
Well, not quite the first, because there's a lot about the Ashira in the Veil of Night Dark Ages book, for example, which is actually a pretty good book. I recommend it. But obviously, like writing the Ashira is like it's very exciting because there's so little about them in the existing material, but that also means that there's a lot of pressure to sort of get it right and make sure that, especially the cultural context that was mentioned in a question earlier, that all of that stuff is done right. Like I personally, I have organized LARPs before in my LARP making career with Muslim LARP organizers, and I would like to stay in their good graces even after we have published this material.
All right. Thanks, Johanna. Let's see here. We have one for Chris here. To piggyback on the question about the BNS to V5 transition, the book isn't addressing it as BNS transitioning to V5, i.e. the Independent Alliance existed but falls apart. But it's just this is a V5 setting as part of the tabletop RPG, rather than as related to BNS, correct? Since that seems more the intent of the question that was asked.
I'm going to jump in here and say correct.
Yes,
as
that's
part of part of the TTRPG rather than
yes,
the.
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I think we're on the same page, Ryan. I was saying yes. That's exactly correct. I didn't mean to cut you off, Ryan. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to jump into these last couple of questions real quick. So I see that Min has asked, what sort of safety tools are being talked about the introduction of Nordic techniques to the vampire? What kind of safety tools are involved? I think is what the gist of this is. And we've already promoted some of them on our Facebook and through email. But there's these concepts of the player contracts, the magic circle, the campsite rule. Safety is something that is is a very big focus in these Nordic games because consent, collaboration, safe. Again, you have to feel safe in order to be able to play a LARP and get what you're looking for out of it, which is self-actualization. You kind of go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and under shelter, safety, food, all those things. All of them have to be in place as you go up the pyramid, and eventually, a sense of community, a sense of pride and accomplishment. And then finally, you get to the self actualization, which is the goal of everything that we're trying to do here. And to get to that, all those things have to be in place. And that's very much an idea that they're mindful of in Nordic settings. Excuse me, Larp.
Yeah, I can add to that just a little bit. Like I absolutely 100% agree that when players feel when they feel safe, when they feel good about themselves, when they trust each other, that's when it's possible to explore more emotional topics and darker topics when all of the other stuff is in place. So that's really a requirement, I think, for a lot of good LARP experiences to happen. And there's a lot of really concrete stuff that also can be used. Like, of course, it's also always good to choose the right mechanic for the specific LARP so it works best. One really good one that has seen a lot of use is this it's called the look down mechanic. And the idea is that you put your hand in front of your face as if you were shading your eyes from the sun, and you sort of discreetly leave the room. And the reason you do that is you have suddenly felt that you don't want to be in this scene anymore, that you don't feel comfortable with it. You think that, okay, this is not working for me. I gotta exit. And then when somebody does that, the other players are obliged to play somehow as if that somehow paper through it, like just paper over it, just make sure that there's some kind of coherence in the scene and just continue playing. And when I've experienced LARPs where this has been used, of course it's a little bit awkward when somebody does that, but in practice that awkwardness lasts for like 30 seconds and then it's gone. And then we continue. And I think that just when I think of like what that mechanic does, it means that I can also trust my co-players more, because I know that if they are uncomfortable, they will use the mechanic and they will leave, and that means that I don't have to worry quite so much about whether everything is okay. And in this way, the fact that people are empowered by the use of these safety tools and calibration tools to take care of their own level of comfort and their own safety, it also makes it kind of less mentally taxing and more easy to just jump into it for everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. We have one more question here that I see right now. I don't know how to pronounce this, though. It's how long until we get the Bombway as discipline?
Well, I have to say that I think that this is a question that kind of comes back to those things that we have to seek to our Father above paradox on. So we'll have to get back with you on that one.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's it. I don't see any more questions. Ryan, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say to everyone who's attended today, and I see a lot of names of folks that I know that have supported this Kickstarter as it's been running. I hope that this was helpful to you. I'll definitely be staying around for a little while afterwards in the our regular voice room to kind of just chat, and we can talk about stories of things we've done in the past. But just want to say how grateful we are to the community for supporting this book. Within 8 hours of launching War of Ages, it was fully funded. As of today, this hour, we're all the way up to 240% funded. With each day, we get further and further along. And I made the joke. I posted a meme with the Groundhog Day. It's Groundhog Day again. We've passed another stretch goal again. And there aren't words that can express how grateful we are to everyone for helping support this book. A lot of people aren't aware of this, but the vast majority of the sales of a product like a LARP book happen during these kind of Kickstarter periods when we have the ability to put the marketing and the attention on it, and folks are willing to share in ways they don't otherwise. And so, whenever you help us get the message out there about, hey, come check out this book. This book could be good for your LARP. It's not telling you to play a different way. It's telling you can play better than you've ever played before, the way you're playing right now. That said, thank you again, everyone.